Hello Israel, with Red Planet coming to you with another video. Okay, Israel, we're gonna show these delicious plants that we can eat if we go camping. Okay, let's get into it, Israel. See what we can eat.
All parts of this plant are edible. The flowers and stalks can be eaten raw, as can the craggy and crinkled leaves, which have a pleasant and slightly sweet taste, very similar to that of lettuce. And although it is a spring bloomer, this plant can also be found throughout the summer and far into autumn, so there is certainly no shortage. You may also find these in orange or violet coloured varieties, but pale yellow is the most common colour. But if the leaves and flowers don't quite fill you up, then you may be interested in its large and extensive root network. Stick your knife in the ground and pull up the lot to reveal the noodle-like network of tasty edible roots. Full of carbs and high in energy. Just take them down to the stream to rinse away any dirt, and you've got yourself a ginormous mound of survival food. Full of carbs, calories, sugars, starch, and fibre, the bountiful primrose is a substantial source of life-sustaining nourishment. And, considering that it is more or less available all year round, then that makes it an absolutely essential edible plant to become familiar with. But pro tip, although everything you see here is edible, that does not necessarily mean that it is clean. And so, if you have the option, then you should always boil your foods first in a cup of water to clean and partially cook them. This is not essential, but it is a best practice. And that applies to all of the items I'll be showing you today. So moving on to the thistle. A familiar sight along the hedgerows and tree lines, the common thistles are easy to spot due to their bulbous eruption of purple flowers, which later turn into those thick clouds of fluffy seed. Notorious for its many prickly spikes, all parts of the plant are covered in unwelcoming spines and prickly bracts, with each of those dark green leaves being host to a very sharp, stiff needle at the end of each lobe. A nuisance to handle, but fortunately for those looking for food, it is the root of the thistle that is edible. In the spring this is an easier job, but knife in, lift up and pull out, to reveal the thick and substantial lengthy taproots, which are full of carbs, sugars and calories. A good survival food that contains everything a starving soul would need. You can eat them raw, just like a carrot or a stick of celery. And the leaves and stalks of the thistle are technically edible too, providing that you cut away all of those sharp needles and bracts. Fireweed. Impressively tall and showy. When fully grown, the fireweed plant will stand at upward to 8 feet tall, and will often be found growing en masse in ginormous colonies that thrive in woodland clearings and riverbanks. Noticeable from a distance, the purple and green spikes of fireweed will feature smooth, slender stems, which are host to 4-petaled bright purple flowers, a series of diagonally climbing seed capsules, and their signature dark green, lance-shaped leaves. Each leaf is slim, narrow and pointed, and, much like a primrose, has a significant white midrib running down the length. In the autumn, those seed capsules will split and erupt into seed, resembling thick, fluffy plumes of candy floss, which makes for a good on-the-fly flash tinder if you're ever in need of fire-making materials. All parts of the fireweed plant are edible. The narrow leaves, the shoots, the stems, and the flowers. But the real prize of fireweed is the pith that's found in the center of the stem. So split the stem down the middle and use a knife to scrape out the edible pale green pith, which is full of nutrients and is quite tasty to boot. You can eat it raw, no need to clean, and you may also be surprised to find that it tastes very similar to cucumber. And as an aside, in Siberian culture, the fresh leaves of fireweed are brewed into hot water to make a tea known as kapuri tea, perhaps a nice refreshing beverage to go alongside the pith. But once you've learned to recognize mature fireweed, then it becomes much easier to spot young fireweed. In the spring, the young shoots of fireweed emerge from the ground, flaunting those slender, lance-shaped leaves and smooth, slender stems, both of which will often have a bright red tinge to them. And as far as edibility is concerned, the redder the better, as those are sweeter in taste. All of these above ground parts are edible raw. You can graze upon the whole lot, but the real prize is beneath the soil. Stick your knife in the ground and pull up the roots, and you will find a humongously long horizontal taproot, which is full of carbs, sugars, and calories, a top-tier survival food. Plus, much like the red foliage, this long, hearty taproot will actually taste quite sweet. So a lucky find for a hungry hiker. Dandelion. A familiar face common in all terrains, its bright yellow sunburst flower and large, jagged, teeth-like leaves are easy to identify and are completely safe to eat. The larger, older leaves tend to be quite bitter, and so the smaller, fresher leaves are typically favoured. Once a popular salad green, all parts of the plant are rich in potassium and iron, more so than spinach, and thus a very nourishing plant to consume. But aside from the flowers and leaves, the roots of the dandelion are technically edible too, although are usually far too bitter to enjoy. However, if you were to roast the roots until brown, grind until fine, and then brew into hot water, then you can make yourself dandelion coffee, which is delicious. Lacking in caffeine, mind you, but regardless, it is a very pleasant substitute for the real thing. So while considered a weed and a nuisance in modern life, out here in the wild, the dandelion is a high-value natural resource and is a safe choice for a snack. And as a bonus, the leaves of dandelion are considerably high in iron, a nutrient that is very useful in combating fatigue. Stinging nettles. Notorious for the sharp stinging needles that cover the plant, stinging nettles, providing they are handled correctly, can be an incredibly vitamin-rich food source for a hungry hiker. With heart or arrowhead-shaped leaves which are heavily serrated all along the edges and droopy hanging flowers when in bloom, the nettles protect themselves from would-be attackers by surrounding themselves in sharp hypodermic needles which inject a stinging acid upon touch, making it quite bothersome to handle, but doable. If you're wearing gloves, then it's easy life, but if not, sacrifice a piece of clothing to be used as a nettle grabber and rip yourself up a good handful, favouring the top portions of the plant, as the fresher the leaves, the better. And then, all of those pesky stinging needles can be quite easily removed by simply holding them in the flames of your campfire, as the heat will completely destroy the needles, leaving the nettles now safe to handle and easy to eat. Nettle leaves are naturally rich in vitamin C, iron and protein, effective at combating the malnourishment that accompanies starvation. And since they are so widespread and there's no bitter taste holding you back, then you can really stock up on the irons and proteins that will keep your body fit and fighting strong. But while out on your travels, you may also encounter nettles that do not have droopy hanging buds, but instead have plump white flowers. These are known as dead nettles, which are unrelated to stinging nettles, but regardless are equal in almost every respect, with the one exception being that the white flowered dead nettles do not have any stinging needles, and so they are harmless to handle and thus are typically favoured for that convenience. Daisy. Small and inconspicuous, this petite and penny-sized grassland flower is another edible to add to the collection. Its central yellow disc, thin wiry stem and white halo of petals are all completely safe to eat. So for an adventure wandering through the plains or grassy woodland clearings, then a handful of daisies makes for a quick on-the-fly burst of energy. But why not supersize that meal with the moon daisy, otherwise known as the oxeye daisy? Bigger and bolder in every respect, the old oxeye is a daisy on steroids. Knee height and 10 times the size, its yellow and white frilly flower heads are a substantial source of food, typically found in meadows and underneath open canopy forests. It also features furry stems and serrated, succulent, almost cactus-looking leaves, which is a key feature that separates it from lookalikes such as dog fennel, which has thin, feathery, wiry leaves. But pretty though oxeyes may be, their scent, however, is one of the worst. Another unique identifier of this plant is that when the flower is crushed or damaged, then it will release a pungent and nauseating odour. A strong deterrent. It truly is foul, certainly not anybody's first choice for a V-Day bouquet. But this is slightly offset by its central yellow disc tasting lightly of pineapples. So an absolutely delicious taste to compensate for its noxious scent. Hawthorn. you've likely heard that red berries should be avoided because they are poisonous, and while this may be true in most cases, there are of course exceptions. One of those exceptions being the hawthorn, a woody tree that produces bundles of bright red edible berries. When identifying fruit trees, it is usually the leaves that you must scrutinize over, as they are likely to be the most unique features. In the case of the hawthorn, its leaves are glossy and dark green, divided into sections, and are deeply lobed, meaning that they have protrusions that stick out rather than being all rounded, while the berries themselves are a glossy bright blood red and have a large black crater down in the base of the berry, an absolutely key feature that helps with identification. Once you're sure you've got the right stuff, then these berries can be eaten raw, fresh off the tree. However, inside of each berry is a large pip or stone that will shatter your teeth if you are too hasty. So squeeze the fruit first, pushing the stone out, and then chow down on the tasty flesh of the fruit. True to its name, the branches of hawthorn do indeed contain sharp thorns, which is inconvenient but a feature that also helps in identification. Do mind your fingers. But if you haven't already filled yourself up on the fruits of hawthorn, then you can also eat the leaves. Pleasant with a slightly appley taste, they can be eaten raw, straight off the tree. And while the berries appear later in the year during the summer and autumn, the leaves, however, are available during the spring, a time where wild food sources are rather scarce. Rowan berry. Another tree which bears bright red fruits is the rowan tree, otherwise known as mountain ash. Likewise, as with hawthorn, it is the shape of the leaves that you must first scrutinize. Rowan leaves are incredibly divided, with each leaf being composed of around 15 individual leaflets, which are sharply toothed or serrated all along the edges. Overall, they resemble ladder rungs and are very reminiscent of fern fronds, with the berries themselves being orangey red in colour, with a small brown star-shaped stud right in the base of the berry. However, these berries are toxic when they are raw. These must not be eaten straight off the tree, as they contain a toxin known as parasorbic acid, which will make you incredibly sick. However, this toxin is completely destroyed by heat, so cooking your rowan berries in a pot of boiling water will render them completely harmless and safe to eat. And as a bonus, rowans do not contain any large teeth-shattering stones, so once boiled, then you can really just sit back and shovel them in, they're good to go. Cooked rowan berries are naturally high in vitamin C, so they are a healthy and nutritious burst of sugars and vital energy. Garlic mustard. With edible leaves that have a spicy, oniony taste, garlic mustard is a highly prized wild food. Found throughout the woodland with a preference towards the banks of rivers and ponds, it is capable of reaching heights of 1 meter and grows in abundance wherever you may find it. It features crinkled, heart-shaped leaves with nettle-like serrations, smooth, slender stems, and clusters of 4-petaled, cross-shaped white flowers, which seem comparatively small to the rest of the plant. Overall, it is a simple plant, quite easy to overlook. But its most significant and unmistakable feature is that when the leaves are crushed, then they will release the strong, pungent scent of garlic, a foolproof method of identification. Considered one of the best tasting plants that you can find out here in the wild. Its edible parts include the fresh leaves, the stems, the white flowers, and the vertical wiry seed pods. All parts of the plant have a strong garlic and oniony flavour, with the fresh leaves having the strongest taste. A welcome change from the comparatively bland taste of other edibles, its tasty leaves appear early in the spring and last throughout the autumn. So not only is it delicious, but it is also widely available. You should favour the top portions of the plant as they contain all edible components and are much fresher and flavoursome. So delicious, in fact, that they were once a staple herb in European cuisine, frequently added into salads for a spicy kick. Nowadays, though, the plant has lost its luster and is now considered an invasive weed, as it dominates and overcrowds the local flora, eventually colonizing entire swathes of land, which makes it a menace to the ecosystem, but very convenient to those looking for food. So due to its abundance, its ease of identification, every part of the plant being edible, and its year-round availability, it is arguably one of the best wild foods that you can find while out in the sticks. Eating as much of it actually helps the environment rather than harms it, so with no guilt, you can graze upon the lot for a spicy and filling, ancestor-approved source of food. Red clover. Famous for its vast carpets of 3- or 4-leaf shamrocks, a universally recognized symbol of good luck, the clover boasts a bulbous edible flower, which is a surprisingly good source of protein. Reddish pink in color, with each flower being composed of hundreds of small individual tubular florets. They flower from the late spring all the way up until the early frosts of winter. Location depending, these flower heads will contain 20% protein. You can expect at least 10 grams of protein per 100 grams, giving it a higher protein content than both spinach and kale combined, making it a top choice in wild food, as a higher protein content always equates to a higher calorie content. But despite the flower heads being striking and easy to ID, it is the leaves of the plant that really seal the deal. Trifoliate in groups of 3, upon each individual leaflet there will be a distinct white crescent-shaped chevron, and this is an absolutely critical feature, as the presence of chevrons indicates that this is an edible species. Both the protein-rich flower heads and the bountiful carpets of leaves are all nutritious and safe to eat. Edible raw, but better boiled to make them easier for your body to digest. You will also find that both parts have a mild sweetness to them, very similar to the taste of peas, which is no surprise, being as botanically the clover does belong to the same family as the common pea. And historically, due to their pleasant taste, calorie content and nutritional value, clovers were once a go-to famine food, a viable alternative food source in times where not much else was available. So with those patches of leaves being absolutely plentiful, the protein-rich flower heads being substantial, and its past history as a famine food, the clover has earned itself the reputation of being a top-tier survival food. Also, clovers can be found in a white, pale cream coloured variety, which, aside from colour, is equal in every respect. Just look out for the 3-leaf shamrocks with crescent-shaped white chevrons to really seal the deal when it comes to identification. Knapweed. From a distance, its pink firework of a bloom looks a lot like a thistle, but up close it resembles a clover, in that its tight and tidy, neat-looking flower head is actually composed of dozens of individual pink and white-tipped florets. As seemingly a hybrid of 2 familiar edibles, the knapweed offers itself as yet another nourishing source of wild food. But unlike its thistle doppelganger, this plant does not have any sharp needles or spikes, and so it is smooth and easy to handle. The pink flowers of knapweed are completely safe to eat. Other parts of the plant can be eaten too, although they are usually far too tough and woody to be palatable, with that brown pineapple-looking bud beneath the flower being incredibly tough to chew. It is like tree bark, and this plant has the common nickname of hardheads for that very reason. So ignore the hardhead bud and just pluck out the flowers for a sweet-tasting and chewy bundle of sugars, vitamins and minerals. But why settle for less when usually not too far away is greater knapweed. Identical to knapweed in every respect, with the one exception being that additional branched outer ring of florets, which gives this greater variety of knapweed a much larger and scruffier appearance. But likewise, as with lesser knapweed, the woody scaled bud that bears the flowers is far too tough to chew. So just pinch away those pinkish purple flowers and then chow down for a quick and easy little trail nibble. Burdock. From spring onwards, you may find these large clusters of gigantic leaves, and this is the burdock, which is otherwise known as elephant's ears. Truly massive, this plant produces leaves that can grow upwards to 3 feet in length. On top, the leaves are deeply crinkled and craggy in texture, while underneath they are a much paler shade of green with a light coating of fuzzy hairs, much like an upscaled version of a primrose leaf, as they both share similar features. The stems too will often have a light coating of fuzzy hairs and will be completely hollow when sliced in half. They will also be found growing in a tuft, meaning that rather than being one single central main stalk, it is instead composed of multiple individual stalks that all seem to grow out of the same point from within the ground. Both the elephantier leaves and the celery-like stalks can be eaten completely raw for a substantial bundle of cellulose. But there is much more to burdock than just the foliage, as the real prize jewel of this plant is actually the root that's found buried deep beneath the soil. So just dig around that big old tuft of stems and eventually you will find a very large and very long, substantial edible taproot. Being typically 30 centimeters in length and 1 inch in width, the burdock root is the absolute goldmine of wild edible foods. So just give it a quick peel with your knife to remove any of the dirt, and then you can eat the whole root raw. Crunchy, watery, and tasting mildly like a carrot, it is absolutely packed full of energy and is almost completely equal to potato in calories, carbs, and protein content. So something really quite special for those on the brink of starvation. And although it is quite a laborious task to dig up that foot-long taproot, it is definitely worthwhile, as you will gain significantly more calories by eating it than you will lose through the exertion of digging it. Burdock root is also especially popular in Japanese cuisine, where it is known as gobo, elderberry. Sometimes found as a bush but more often a tree when in woodland environments, the elder produces ginormous and droopy bunches of shiny BB-sized black edible berries. Berries that are considered to be superfruits in that their nutritional value is far superior to other fruits you may find out here. Identified by its large clusters that can host up to 200 berries per bunch. Each berry is a 5mm sized ball that is shiny and deeply purple, borderline black, when it is fully ripe. Connecting them are purple or maroon coloured stems, and on the thornless branches are leaves which have heavily serrated margins. The density of the bundle, along with how it truly hangs and droops down, is how elder is distinguished from other lookalikes, such as pokeweed, which has nigh identical berries but grows on a phallic cob, and dogwood berries, which are far less densely packed, have small hairs on the flesh of the berry, and are a dull matte black rather than shiny. And once you're sure you've got the right stuff, then these elderberries can be eaten raw, fresh off the tree, as long as they are completely ripe, as you must avoid eating the unripened green or red elderberries, as they are mildly toxic. Similarly, you must also avoid eating the maroon-coloured stems, as those are quite toxic too, possessing small quantities of cyanide. So, real emphasis, you must only eat the dark purple ripened fruits only. Nutritious and full of antioxidants, elderberries contain 3 times more vitamin C than tomatoes, twice the protein of apples, and double the calories of strawberries. As far as nutritional content goes, they put other fruits to shame. It would of course be wonderful to stumble upon a bunch of fresh strawberries while out in the sticks. Well, one should be equally, if not even more, overjoyed to stumble across elderberries, as they are the far superior fruit. Blackberry. The most common of fruits that are easy enough to find when they are in the hedgerow, but in the woodland you do not find the blackberry finds you. If you've ever had your trousers snagged by thick vines that are laden in thorns, then you have made contact with woodland blackberry, which in this context are more commonly known as brambles. So just follow the vine, usually through the whole thicket, and eventually you will find the otherwise hidden fruits of the blackberry. Soft, squidgy, and composed of multiple drupelets, these fruits are one of the best known forest foods that can be eaten raw straight off the bush. But let that not make us complacent, as identification is secured by studying the foliage. With scrambling vines that can grow up to 1 inch thick in diameter, they are covered in thorns and can be either red or green in colour. And the leaves, which either grow in groups of 3 or 5, have very jagged and serrated edges, are a dark green on top, and while underneath they are a much paler shade of green and have a long trail of prickles that run down the entire length of the midrib vein. Providing that you run your knife down the midrib to remove all the prickles, then these leaves can be eaten raw too. And, as a bonus, they are evergreen, meaning that they will be available all year round as a source of food even throughout the barren midst of winter. Pineapple weed. Low-growing and never more than a foot tall, pineapple weed features a flower head that is acorn-like in shape. It is a bulbous yellow and green dome that is seemingly lacking in petals. Strange, but this is a petalless flower head. Pineapple weed also features leaves which are thin, feathery, wiry sprigs, and, true to its name, when either part of this plant is crushed or damaged, then it will release the sweet, delicious scent of pineapples. A wonderful perk, but also a signature characteristic that aids in identification. The bald flower head, the stems, and the feathery sprawling leaves are all nutritious and are safe to eat. The taste is sweet, mildly like a pineapple, with a little hint of citrus. So eat them raw while on the move, or perhaps just steep them into a cup of hot water for a delicious and refreshing pineapple-scented beverage. Rosehip. These bright red and fleshy seed-bearing pods are the fruits of the dog rose tree, a tree which displays small serrated oval-shaped leaves and 5-petaled white or soft pink flowers during the spring through summer. But after pollination, those rose flowers will develop into edible red fruits, which are known as haws or hips. They are shiny, firm, and typically oblong in shape, with a dark brown plug or tendrils shooting out the bottom. Their unique shape makes them easy to identify, and their most unique selling point is that they contain 10 times more vitamin C than oranges. They contain 420 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams, as opposed to the comparatively meager 60 milligrams found in oranges. So, any risk of scurvy? No, sir, not today. But some preparation is required before you can eat rose hips. Cut the fruit in half to reveal the innards. Inside you will find a cluster of seeds, which are covered in harsh, bristly hairs. These hairy seeds are an irritant and are a choking hazard, and so these must be scraped out with a knife until all that remains is the clean and smooth, tasty flesh of the hip. These fruits are now completely harmless and safe to eat, and so go ahead, they're good to go. And as a bonus, these fruits will contain over 3 times more calories than apples. Crab apples. Varying in colour from green to red, and varying in size from golf ball to cricket ball, wild apples, which are known as crab apples, are a non-toxic and edible species of apple. However, they are far too bitter and far too sour to be eaten raw. And this is not a bitterness that you can just overcome by manning up, as they are so sour and so bitter that they will actually hurt your teeth and temporarily paralyze your facial muscles as the sharp twang hits you hard. So harsh, in fact, that they can often be found intact and on the ground long after they have dropped from the tree, suggesting that they are also far too bitter for even animals to consume. But you are a human, capable of cooking, and thus the true delicious potential of the crabapple is available to you. So gather your apples, ideally those plucked fresh from the tree, chop them up into tiny pieces, and then throw them into a cup of boiling water and keep boiling until all of the water has evaporated away. And what you'll be left with is a thick and saucy crabapple puree that is significantly less bitter, a lot more palatable, and is incredibly warm and filling. It's good carbs, it's good sugar, and it's good calories. It is all the things needed to help you in fueling your venture. Pine needles. An evergreen food source available all year round, the green and coniferous needles of the pine tree have a fresh and minty taste and can be eaten raw straight off the tree. Although, since they tend to grow very high up on the tree, you may have to settle for those fallen to ground. This particular species of pine is Scots pine, which has 3 to 4 inch long needles which always come in pairs of 2. However, other species of pine will differ. Pine needles have very little calories and thus they do not have much value as an energy source. But since they taste so nice and contain tons of vitamin A and C, they are more often steeped into hot water to make pine needle tea. A refreshing and nutritious minty beverage that will sure as hell break the monotony of drinking the otherwise bland and boring cups of pond water. Pine nuts. And while you're out collecting pine needles, be sure to keep an eye out for pine nuts. As pine cones mature and open out in the fall, they will shed their seeds, and these are the edible nuts of the pine tree. Found around the base of the tree, often buried beneath the leaf litter, they are oblong in shape, cream in colour, and actually contain more calories than peanuts. So, spending a few minutes rummaging around that fallen foliage proves to be a very rewarding endeavour, as they are full of protein and full of calories due to their natural fat content. So, a mouthful of pine nuts is definitely a top-tier trail nibble worth looking out for during those long hikes. Pine nuts are also a staple food in many regions and cultures, frequently used in Italian cuisine. So, with that in mind, that should help you feel a little bit better about the prospect of eating nuts that you find lying in the dirt. These nuts are also a fan favourite amongst the squirrels and such, and so it is highly unlikely that you will find any large quantity of them. But if you are persistent and thorough in your search, then you may just get lucky and hit the jackpot. Poppy seed. With 4 overlapping scarlet red petals and protruding black stamens, the bright and vibrant poppies are easy to spot from a distance. But beautiful though they may be, their edible value, however, comes from once the flower has died. Once the petals fall, what's left behind is a bulbous oval pod, which is initially green, but will soon dry and harden into a brittle, straw-coloured pod. Just crack these pods open, and inside you will find hundreds upon hundreds of small black poppy seeds. Yes, like pepper grounds, but smaller and more kidney-shaped, these highly nutritious and edible seeds are actually one of the highest sources of calories that you can find out here. Per gram, they have 5 times more calories than chicken breast and 3 times more calories than steak, which may sound absolutely outrageous, but since nuts and seeds are super high in fat, their calorie content is much higher than most things. Poppy seeds are 70% fat. So should you stumble upon a bunch of dry poppy pods, then count your blessings, because that's Mother Nature's way of telling you to carry on, son. You will not starve today. Just eat them raw, straight out of the pod, for a humongous burst of energy while on the move. Walnuts. Along the ground, you may stumble across these golf ball-sized, smooth green husks. These are the unripened, nut-bearing husks of the walnut tree, which from below resembles a horse chestnut conker tree. These green husks, which are incredibly tough to get through, contain a shell which stores a nut, but this nut will not have yet matured, and so the green husked walnuts should be discarded, and instead you should focus your search on the most rotten and brown husks, as a rotten husk is indication that the nut inside has matured. So gather them up, smash them open with a rock, and lo and behold, there is a tasty edible walnut. Perhaps not as large or as impressive as store-bought walnuts, but regardless, they are super high in fat, super high in protein, and super high in calories. They contain everything a starving soul would need, and so spending a few minutes searching beneath the walnut tree proves to be a highly rewarding and worthwhile endeavour. And last but not least, we have acorns, the familiar seeds of the oak tree. Nestled in a scaly cup with dark green heavily lobed leaves, acorns are so common that they are often overlooked. But whether green when on the tree or brown when on the ground, just cut or crack open that thick outer shell to reveal a large edible nut. Just like a peanut, you can eat them raw, straight down, for super high calories, easy protein, and tons of fat. And due to oak trees being so widespread, and the amount of acorns they produce being so plentiful, the wholesome and hearty edible acorn nuts are a go-to survival food for those in need. Incredibly filling and calorie dense, they are a welcome change from tree leaves and plant stems. However, some species of oak will produce acorns that are incredibly high in tannic acid, meaning that they will be immensely bitter and will make you incredibly sick if you eat too many of them. And so, if you do ever find yourself with acorns that are far too bitter to consume, then just simply drop them in a cup of boiling water for half an hour. And the end result will be a more palatable, less bitter, and tastier edible acorn. But being so dry, these will make you thirsty if you eat too many of them, which is not good if you're running low on water, but assuming that you got that covered, then kicking back and encumbering yourself with those calorie-dense acorns is a good way to stay alive and kicking. And those are 25 of the most common edible plants, fruits and trees that you can eat while out in the wilderness. Peace!
Okay, Israel. So you know what to do when you go camping, right? You know what's out there that you can eat when you don't have food. Shalom.